ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Textual Healing with myself, Richard Crannan, and my colleague, Dr. Paul Taylor, where we'll be taking an unusual and alternative view of interesting and fascinating texts that we believe you need in your life, such as to offer you textual healing.
Hi everyone, and I'm suffering from title envy because Richard's is much bigger than mine.
Well, I thought I'd keep in spirit in keeping with the spirit of the book. It's not enough that a person have a name. Every single character in the book, in accordance with Russian tradition, should have like 3 or 4 different ways of being addressed. And the author makes very little effort to explain to you who they're talking about at any one moment in time.
Well, I've noticed in the title I've spelt it with an I, but I think on my own channel I've spelt it with a Y, Dostoevsky, because there's about 8 different ways you can spell that as well. So on and on it goes.
Yes.
If I can just apologize to everyone, it's been a bizarre experience. The last 3 or 4 days I've had a bit of a virus, temperature, etc. And reading Brothers Karamazov with a bit of a fever has been a truly bizarre experience, given that the word fevered or frenzy seems to be mentioned every 3rd line.
Yes, it is one of the themes of the book. When I read it, it was in 2021, and I was going through, in the summer of 2021, and I was going through a bit of a hard time myself, and I was in a bit of a fevered frenzy when I was reading it, and it set me off on a whole path of investigation to review old Buddhist texts and Vedic teachings and the Vedanta and all of that about non-attachment, because many of the characters in this book suffer because they're incredibly attached to various things.
I was gonna suggest, Richard, that you basically lead this, because I'm happy to go with your steer. But before we did that, I have one aspect I'd want to talk about, because I just did a brief survey, videos when people talk about the Brothers Karamazov, and everything's very thematic. And I just wanted to say to viewers also that I'm going to be doing some in-depth videos on the actual text itself, because one of my slight frustrations is, and for us I think today it's going to be different because we're having a chat, and we can delve into the text a bit, but we can't do a particularly systematic thing, otherwise it's not a chat anymore. But when I've seen people speaking to camera about the book, and there are quite long videos sometimes, one aspect that never seems to get mentioned is the actual language, the tone of the writing, which, like I said, I don't know whether it's my recent fever, but reading in quite a normally I read quite quickly, so I would have expected to read this in 3 or 4 days, and it took me at least 7 or 8 days, just because I couldn't read for 2-3 hours at a time. It would drive you mad, which was something I don't remember when I've read this book years ago. So it's the tone, it's the frenzied. It's like, I think I might have read an apocryphal story that Dostoevsky used to have a samovar of tea on the go, and he'd write late into the night, and it reads like an over-caffeinated person's writing. It's borderline hysterical all the time, and I've never seen many people talk about that. They almost seem just to take it for granted. What do you think?
I think there's a definite effort on his part to if we're inside the this to me is a psychological novel. Of course it is. I can't change the channel, can I? It's a psychological novel. It's an effort, I think, an early effort to do a kind of psychology, and I think in line with that, when he's writing from inside of the head of one of the characters or from their point of view, the writing style changes. And some of these characters are severely mentally ill. They're very, very mentally sick people. And I think that's reflected in the writing style. The other thing I would say to people watching is don't be intimidated by the writing itself. The writing style can be hysterical at times, but it's actually, I walked into this thinking, oh my God, it's ancient Russian literature. It's going to be impenetrable. It's actually quite clear. It is, as Paul says, at times hysterical when the characters are becoming hysterical. But there is, it's not got a ton of very, very fancy, obfuscatory adjectives in it. It's pretty clearly written. And it is obviously an early effort to kind of offer a kind of a dramatic psychoanalysis, I think, of different types of people and how their way of being in the world affects them.
I'm taking that as a tacit condemnation of my demotivational description, because I'm going to put people off, and it wasn't meant that way. But what one slight counter I'd say to what you've just said is that it's not just several of the characters; everyone speaks in a frenzied manner, to the extent that, diving straight into the plot, there's Mitcher gets arrested, and I think it's the chief police gets told to shut up by one of the prosecutors because he's talking in a vaguely hysterical fashion at Mitcher. So I can't think of any. Even Alyosha seems to be frenzied at times. Maybe Father Zosima, the elder, he's probably the calmest person, as you'd expect in the whole book. But I think what I'm trying to describe is it's a generalized febrile atmosphere that once you're right, once you let yourself into it and you don't let it put you off. But it did make me think, I'm surprised that it's managed to stay such a popular book, given that I would have thought in this day and age when people don't read that much, it would have been quite off-putting.
Yeah, I don't know many people who've actually just read it cover to cover. And I think, I'm not defending it. I remember feeling that way about D.H. Lawrence. So I had a beloved English teacher and he loved D.H. Lawrence, but reading D.H. Lawrence used to make me feel sick for that reason. I couldn't stand the atmosphere. I couldn't stand everybody being a hysterical neurotic who was always seemed to be clutching each other and on the point of having a full force nervous breakdown. But then I wonder, this was released as serially, wasn't it? It was released in a newspaper across 3 years of
I think two.
Four,
I think it was
maybe?
1879 to 1881.
Okay.
God, I am senile. I knew. I think it's the Russian. I've forgotten the name of the journal, but it was a literary journal, and interestingly, it was published alongside the serialized form of War and Peace. And I also found out while I was reading about. Well, this is it that you see. If you'll forgive me, just to give you some. The article I was reading was saying that roughly these are just ballpark figures. If you think of the golden age of ancient Greece, its writing was at its peak for approximately 150 years. Then they said, if you think of English literature, I think the last of Shakespeare's tragedies and then John Milton's Paradise Lost was about 75-year period where you could argue English literature was at its absolute peak. And the article was saying Russian literature of this era in 25 years was condensed. Turgenev, Gogol, Goncharov, Tolstoy, all these brilliant writers. And so these literary journals would have, in that particular, like I said, in this journal, it was this book, Brothers Karamazov, and War and Peace, which I think at the time was, they started off, it was called The Year 1805 was the name of the novel. And then, because it took more than a year for it to be serialized, he actually changed the name to War and Peace. And there's an episode of Seinfeld, for anyone interested in trivia, whereby Elaine gets told the original title was War, What Is It Good For? And she believed this and told a literary agent who got really angry with her.
So I wonder if the pressures of serializing it and making it compelling had an impact on that. Like every single episode needs to have drama, and maybe what we're feeling is an effort to sort of impute drama into every chapter.
Well, can I give another theory? Because it struck me that when you read it as dialogue, it struck me as incredibly unrealistic, and it's not just the time difference when it was written or the fact it's translated, because I've read a lot of Russian literature translated of that time, and it doesn't have the same hysterical tone throughout. But then I started thinking, actually, whilst it may seem incredibly unrealistic as dialogue, when you think of it as nobody actually reads writing as people genuinely think. So when we think, if you could accurately record it, I think people would be shocked at how random and borderline hysterical our thoughts are, because by the time we get to speak, they've been processed much more. And to give you an example, when one of my first ever research jobs, I went around it was researching the National Health Service, and I went around recording clinical directors. So you get to interview people, and they obviously talk back to you. It gets recorded and transcribed. And apart from one person, the way we speak is incredibly unstructured. Sentences run on, sentences aren't self-contained, things don't make full sense when you speak. And there was one clinical director who, surprise, surprise, was a psychologist who spoke in perfect self-contained paragraphs. When I came to type it up, it was a bizarre feeling because he spoke as you should write. But the thing I'm trying to emphasize is that is an absolute anomaly. The vast majority of people speak in quite an inchoate, unstructured way. And I think Dostoevsky captures that. So if people were communicating like aliens through pure thoughts, I think it would be a much more accurate book from that point of view. Do you agree, or do you think that's rubbish?
No, I think it points to the thing I was saying earlier, that it's an effort towards psychology, when psychology is a nascent. It's not a science yet. It's an idea, really, a sort of a blossoming idea. And I hadn't thought of that. Maybe what we're really reading is partly unconscious and partly conscious, and then from that point of view, it works because all of the neurosis would be kept tightly packed beneath the costume. But in this reading, it's actually exposed, and you see how lunatic the average human, how vulnerable, fragile, and hysterical the average human entity is. And maybe that's part of the effect.
Yeah, I don't know what translation you're using, but the one I had, one whole book is called, has the title Lacerations. And I looked, I think in Russian, one translator was arguing it should actually be rupture rather than lacerations. And it's, is it navja? There's a Russian word that basically means rupture. And he was saying that it's rupture after a prolonged period of suppression. So it's a bit like an eruption of emotion. And that makes sense. But that's just one section of the book's called that. But you could argue that that accurately portrays the whole atmosphere of the whole book.
Yeah, I was just looking. Yeah, mine is Laceration as well. This is the Garrett version?
Constance Garnet, yeah.
Garnet. Yeah, so I've got that same thing. So yeah, maybe some things don't translate all that well. That's a possibility too. So
what did you like? Sorry, despite the fact you've adopted the Russian name, what did interest me also was the Russian atmosphere, and maybe we can talk about more of that later. But I came across, just to give some context, I think, if you did put me under psychological regression, I would have Russian ancestry. Because the darkness, the misery, it really speaks to me in quite a weirdly uplifting way. And I remember reading a story about, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the Russian version. They had to stop.
No, I don't know that.
Well, no, what I mean is, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the TV series. Well, it was syndicated across the world. And what I find interesting is the different cultures respond to it differently. And in the Russian version, they had to stop asking the audience because the audience deliberately kept giving the wrong answer. Because the Russian mentality was, why should you have 1,000,000 rubles? It should be mine, so I'm not going to do anything to help you win it. Whereas all this happy-clappy Westerners are like, oh yeah, we'll try and help. I thought that summed up the Russian spirit brilliantly.
Yeah, it's an insight into a different way of thinking and being. It seems a whole different period, whole different coordinates.
One thing I wanted to ask you was, do you because from a historical point of view, I think it was written in the periodical, in the journal, in 1879. The events of the book, I think, are supposed to be 13 years earlier. So that's 1866. And I think in 1861, there was the emancipation of the peasants. So you're talking, when it's written, the serfs have only just been released from serfdom. And I think that's an aspect Western readers just fail to fully understand. A society that's actually had, we call them serfs, but effectively slaves. And it's 5 years after when the actual events are set. So it's still within, or it's almost instantaneous in historical terms that these people have been released. So you've got the difference between, and it becomes relevant, in the court case at the very end of the novel, when the guilty verdict's plot spoiler, but the guilty verdict is largely due, it's implied, to the peasants on the jury, because they don't buy into the $10 a word lawyers summing up. And over the whole, what I find interesting is over the whole novel, there is this Grigor, the character who basically raises Mitya. The difference between the peasantry and the actual landowners, the minor aristocracy. I think there's a disjuncture between people that, just to repeat, I think from a Western point of view, it's difficult to get our heads around.
It's interesting you saying that, because I didn't catch any of that on the first reading, but then when I was reading some of the texts, I was trying to find my favorite passages today, and I was thinking about the fourth brother who's never confirmed as being a brother, Smerdyakov, and I thought that's a weird sounding name. That's a bit like Darth Vader. Obviously, whoever wrote that, it's darkness, dark invader. So I was like, I wonder if that works in Russian. So I looked it up, and it said yes, it means peasant, and also has an implication of an untouchable peasant person, Smerdyakov. So the name references his wretchedness.
I think it means stinking as well.
Stinky, like his mum.
Yeah, because remember, stinking Lizaveta, and I think there's a weird, very minor band in America called Stinking Lizaveta. I remember seeing this years ago. Then there's I don't know whether they still run, but even years ago when I saw a video, there's quite an elderly lady on the drums who I think might be the eponymous Lizaveta. I don't want to insult her in any shape or form.
Yeah, it's interesting. Should I go straight into what I was looking at today, and then we'll have a little look at that. So, looking at it from a psychological point of view, the person I was most interested, you've got three brothers and a possible fourth in Smerdyakov. With Dmitri, you've got somebody who has fuses and merges with his partners, the object of his affection. He idealizes and rages, and in modern terminology, we would probably consider him a kind of a borderline personality disordered man. He's way too attached and he loves way too intensely, which is a response to the pressure of being alive as a human being. Maybe Dostoevsky is suggesting. Another brother, Ivan, would represent the mind and reason. He's more of an avoidant type. He's a hyper intellectualizer, which is a very common defense to pain and to trauma. He becomes an atheist and then starts to crumble under the weight of his own guilt and rebellion against God, I think the implication is. He has obsessive compulsive personality disorder traits and is highly depressive. Then you have Alyosha. So Dmitri would be the passions in the body. Ivan is mind and pure reason. Alyosha is soul and faith. So he's the only one with a secure attachment style. He's not defensive. He accepts and is compassionate, and is probably the most psychologically healthy. Then you have the shadow of all three of them, which, this is a reach, but of course this is where I would go to. That Smerdyakov represents learned helplessness that becomes covert control. He's a classic vulnerable, narcissistic psychopath. He can't rage. He can't have principles. He has no compassion. He's purely psychopathic in the sense that his world is cold, private, resentful, parasitic, and self-pitying. And he falls into a moral collapse. This is a guy who uses fake weakness. He feigns epilepsy to trick his prey into thinking that he's more helpless than he is. He has suicidal ideation. He's the trauma response of the forgotten child, the one who's raised without love, identity, or belonging, who retreats into cold nihilism and covert sadism. So he's the shadow of all these characters. Maybe, this is conjecture on my part, that maybe Dostoevsky was suggesting 4 modes of being, and that's without touching Daddy Fyodor, who is just a grandiose, anally expulsive narcissist.
No offense, but I see him as just the embodiment of your intercontinental debauched lifestyle.
I was rereading the scene today where he's taken by his lovely, sensitive son, Alyosha, to see his spiritual master. Is it Father Zosima?
Zosima.
And Zosima. And the scene that the father makes, it really, really brought me back to my own childhood with my own father. Like some of the shit that my dad would say to people. And and Alyosha's standing there going, fucking hell, I've brought him to the greatest spiritual leader in Russia today. And he's talking about sex. He's talking about tits. He's talking, it's just.
Can I share something with you?
It's really grotesque.
I don't normally share a lot of personal stuff, but there was an instance where I'm sat in I'm trying to think, is it Knutsford? You might know Knutsford. It's a little town in the north of England that's relatively posh. Well-to-do. So I think it was with my sister and my father and somebody else. But my father sat on a little bar stool and we're all around a pub table. I think we were having lunch. And he must have been at this point, I'm guessing, in his 60s, maybe late 60s would be my best guess. And he suddenly fell off his chair. So the waiter the barman ran across to check he was okay and said, yeah, I'm fine. Got back and sat on the stool. And I said to him, what happened? And his exact quote was, I was bored.
Fucking hell.
And I've got an element of that, because if I cause mischief, it's because I just find, if I'm in a constrained environment that I can't control, I just think, well, it's easier just to cause mayhem, and then at least you're in some type of control. And you know why people are glaring at you and don't like you.
Speaking of reaction-seeking psychopathy, do you recall in the Liverpool seminar? So I'll recount this briefly. Mark Vicente was talking about psychopathy and cult leaders, and he showed a video of Tom Cruise, who knows how to fly jets, and he'd flown a friend of his in a jet. And what had he done? He'd flown him at such a speed that it caused unconsciousness. Was that the story?
Or I think he threatened to kill the engines or scared him, or a combination of both.
He basically knocked this guy out, knocked him unconscious, and the guy through his flying of the jet, and the guy came to him and, what happened? And Tom Cruise said to him, oh, you just dropped off for a second there, don't worry about it. And then started laughing. And this was shown on screen, and everybody in the seminar, the psychologists who were there lecturing, everybody was deadly silent, like this is the worst thing ever. Me and Paul are at the back giggling like schoolboys. We think it's hilarious. By Liverpool standards, that's a pretty good joke, that. You just knock your mate out for a couple of seconds for a laugh. So yes, there is something of the reaction-seeking psychopathy there.
Well, yeah, but to be serious for a second, though, I do think the Fyodor, maybe you and I are very bad examples. We are hardly representative of the population at large, thank God. But I think most people, there is a self-sabotaging element that people will. And maybe you put your finger on something there about the Liverpool culture, is that for the sake of a good joke, you would embarrass yourself in a way that the vast majority of the population wouldn't go there. Because the joke is everything.
The joke is everything. The most important thing is the joke, and it's primal. You could lose a job, you can lose your wife, but be funny. Be funny. Being funny is the most fucking important thing. Yeah, sorry.
No, and I was going to say that, so that aspect, I think it's a clever thing for Dostoevsky to have done, because it makes Fyodor actually a bit more human. If he was just this debauched nutter, which I think is a technical term from psychology, you wouldn't be as empathetic with him, or you wouldn't have any empathy. But I think there's just enough of the buffoonery. You realise that he's not comfortable. He's doing this because he can't help himself. That's how, well, that's how I
He
read it.
says,
But
no, he says that. He says that. This is why it's such a psychologically literate book. And the passage I chose is talks about is that passage where the spiritual leader sees him for what he is and says, you know, you play the fool, but you don't mean it. You're just riddled with shame. And then it's very subtle and very elegant what Dostoevsky has the character do. Fyodor says, thank you so much. Yes, I do act the fool. And he's still acting the fool, even as he acknowledges the compassion and the kindness. I am so full of shame. You wouldn't believe it. And so the father, the spiritual leader, says, just be yourself. No, you couldn't stand me to be myself. And this is an old, frail man who walks over to him and grabs his hands. He becomes physically contacted with him, to the horror of Alyosha, the young son, who's a deeply spiritual chap. And that's the passage I chose to read out, because I think it shows a really nuanced understanding of psychology before psychology was really a discipline at all. It's very psychologically literate. I'm ready to read this thing out if you're happy for me to read it out. Right, I have to search the keyword paps. There are two lines in this book that I really like, and they're actually next to each other. There's two speeches that are delivered in this book, and they're actually next to each other. I do apologize, ladies and gentlemen.
While you're looking for it, if I could just later on, I'd like to talk to you to build on your point about Smerdakov being the narcissist, because, well, there are two things I'd say about that, and we can expand upon it later. Just let me know when you found it. But one is that Smerdakov is treated awfully by his brothers. Even Alyosha, the saintly person, refers to him as the lackey. And remember, he is the brother, potentially, of the other three, the half-brother. And yet, so this is a rare occasion where I'm showing some empathy in the sense that he's partly a creature of the way they've treated him. But secondly, what I want to talk about in much more depth later is Ivan. I think Ivan is a raging, card-carrying narcissist to end all narcissists.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, the way I read him, there is a personality disorder that looks externally very, very similar to narcissism. It's not well known, it's not well understood. It's called obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Rather frustratingly, it has very little to do with obsessive compulsive disorder. Why do psychologists do this? I don't know. The obsessive compulsive in the personality disorder is obsessive compulsive control. So they're extremely rigid, extremely controlling, and very, very demanding. And it's all about, what Ivan's trying to do is trying to control the world and his life and his emotions through his mind. And I think it would feel as the recipient like this is very much NPD behavior, but technically it would be obsessive compulsive personality disorder. But the end result is the same. You would feel it as very narcissistic, very non-compassionate, very self-involved.
Have you found it, or do you want me to?
I have. No, I've found it.
Go for it.
What was taking place in the cell was really incredible. For 40 or 50 years past, from the times of former elders, no visitors had entered that cell without feelings of the profoundest veneration. Almost everyone admitted to the cell felt that a great favor was being shown him. Many remained kneeling during the whole visit. Of those visitors, many had been men of high rank and learning, some even free thinkers, attracted by curiosity, but all, without exception, had shown the profoundest reverence and delicacy, for here there was no question of money, but only, on the one side, love and kindness, and on the other, penitence and eager desire to decide some spiritual problem or crisis. This is in the cell of Father Zosima. So that such buffoonery, this is the buffoonery being played out by Fyodor, so that such buffoonery amazed and bewildered the spectators, or at least some of them. The monks, with unchanged countenances, waited with earnest attention to hear what the elder would say, but seemed on the point of standing up, like Musov. Alyosha stood with hanging head on the verge of tears. Alyosha was mortified. What seemed to him strangest of all was that his brother Ivan, on whom alone he had rested his hopes, and who alone had such influence on his father that he could have stopped him. He sat now quite unmoved, with downcast eyes, apparently waiting with interest to see how it would end, as though he had nothing to do with it. Alyosha did not dare to look at Rakitin, the divinity student whom he knew almost intimately. He alone in the monastery knew Ratikin's thoughts. Pyotr Alexandrovich could say no more, was about to leave the room, overwhelmed with confusion. The elder speaks. Don't distress yourself, I beg. The elder got onto his feeble legs and taking Pyotr by both hands made him sit down again. I beg you not to disturb yourself. He's saying, don't be embarrassed, don't leave. I particularly beg you to be my guest. And with a bow, he went back and sat down again on his little sofa. Great elder, speak. Do I annoy you by my vivacity? Fyodor Pavlovitch cried suddenly, clutching the arms of the chair in both hands as though ready to leap up from it if the answer were unfavorable. I earnestly beg you too, not to disturb yourself and not to be uneasy, the elder said impressively. Do not trouble. Make yourself quite at home. And above all, do not be so ashamed of yourself, for that is the root of it all. Quite at home. To be my natural self, oh, that is too much, but I accept it with grateful joy. Do you know, blessed Father, you'd better not invite me to be my natural self. Don't risk it. I will not go so far as that myself. I warn you for your own sake. Well, the rest is still plunged in the midst of uncertainty, though there are people who'd be pleased to describe me for you. I mean that for you, Pyotr. But as for you, holy being, let me tell you, I am brimming over with ecstasy. He got up and throwing up his hands declaimed, Blessed be the womb that bare thee, and the paps that gave thee suck, the paps especially. When you said just now, don't be so ashamed of yourself, for that is the root of it all, you pierced right through me by that remark and read me to the core. Indeed, I always feel when I meet people that I am lower than all, and that they all take me for a buffoon. So I say, let me really play the buffoon. I'm not afraid of your opinion, for you are every one of you worse than I am. That is why I'm a buffoon. It is from shame, great elder, from shame, and simply oversensitiveness that makes me rowdy. If I'd only been sure that everyone would accept me as the kindest and wisest of men, oh Lord, what a good man I should have been then. Teacher, he fell suddenly on his knees. What must I do to gain eternal life? And so the histrionics continue. I really like that passage. It makes me sweat. It's so awful, but there's so much going on there.
Yeah, one question I'd ask is, and maybe it's too convoluted, but potentially it's a double bluff, because I know from personal experience, when what did you call me? You said I was suffering from well, you've called me many things, but you said I was suffering from oppositional
defiance disorder. Defiance.
But part of that, well, exactly, part of that is, I think if something's funny, if I happen to be involved as the victim in the funny scenario, I remember being at an academic conference and I told a story in which I was the butt of the joke. And there was this look of complete concern on this female academic as to why was I sharing this. And I was like, but it was funny. But she seemed to be saying, but you should protect your own sense of self-identity, whatever. So I'm just wondering, is Fyodor using it as an excuse to say he does it out of shame? Or is it potentially that he just does it because he can and it amuses him?
So that's a fucking great question. And I think it points to Dostoevsky's genius, because he doesn't resolve that. He is doing it out of shame. And the wise old monk who we're losing in the story, we're going to lose the wisdom of the monks, because some of them are charlatans and some of them shag their followers and some of them steal money. But Dostoevsky can see where the Russian people are really going to lose something amazing and beautiful with that spiritual connection. And the wise old monk correctly says, dude, you're doing this because you're ashamed of yourself. So please don't be ashamed. I can see, he sees very clearly. But Fyodor doesn't see himself as ashamed. He is, but not consciously. With that narcissistic, grandiose, delusional self, he lacks the ability for introspection. So he takes real insight and uses it as a dildo to keep fucking everyone in the room. Sorry.
Well, just before
I
I
was
forget,
on the Jolly Heretic for a second then.
Well, it's also it's a minor further example, but when Smerdakov and Ivan are discussing Ivan leaving to go to Moscow, there's some very subtle writing, because basically Smerdakov is implying this is a scenario in which your father could be killed, and he talks about the secret signs, how to get in the house, the knocking. And when I think he has the second meeting with him, he actually, Smerdakov says to Ivan, no, you knew what I was suggesting. And all the way through, interspersed, is the narrator's subtle, because it's not often not clear who the narrator actually is. But the narrator is basically saying Ivan felt a deep pang at this point, even though Ivan hasn't done anything. So the implication is that Ivan is actually picking up on Smerdakov's hints, but isn't responding to them vocally. So he has plausible deniability. And then there's the question, to what extent psychologically do we have plausible deniability to ourselves all the time? Because at one level, we subconsciously in our gut know what we meant or what we felt, but to what extent do we deny it to ourselves? And that is... it's an unanswerable question, because the human brain is such that you can simultaneously know about it and deny it and never quite be sure. And I think that's what Dostoevsky, I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're implying about what Dostoevsky is doing.
I am. There's a few things I want to say, and I'll try not to lose them. I'll put that one there and remember it. I was listening on your recommendation to Ian McGilchrist recently, and he was doing his usual spiel, left brain, right brain. And he said something incredible in this interview. He said, the latest neuroscience research indicates that the corpus callosum, yes, it's there to integrate left and right, but it also spends just as much energy separating. So when the left brain is operating, the corpus callosum is actually saying to the right brain, fuck off and leave me alone. So while there is integration, the brain itself splits. So we say, oh, you shouldn't split. Splitting is a trauma response. Well, hang just a moment. Like, we're actually evolved to do that and say, so the old Slavoj Žižek thing, the split, I know and I do not know. That's not a bug, it's a feature. You're supposed to know and not know at the same time. So there is this maybe a biological route for the tendency for disavowal that you're alluding to. The other thing I wanted to say regarding the split, you understand Nietzsche better than I do. Is this a criticism, a covert criticism of the Apollonian man who's lost contact with his Dionysian spirit and therefore can't somatize and emote, and so was frozen when Ivan suggested this? Or am I reading?
Yeah, because Ivan taught. No, well, I think you're exactly right, because Ivan uses the phrase Euclidean. Doesn't he talk about Euclidean geometry or Euclidean logic? Ivan's talking about his own way of thinking and calls it Euclidean, meaning it's excessively geometrical and arithmetic, when your point is that's not how life works. And the critique about the anthill of human society, that's something maybe we can get into, but it's like, that is my critique. That's why I think Ian McGilchrist is so interesting, because he provides a neuroscientific explanation as to why grand schemas don't work with society, because it's only addressing one half of the human condition. And yet perennially politicians pretend they can, well, not so much nowadays, because I think the emperor has no clothes, but historically we all buy into the next great promise, knowing full well at another level, this is the issue about denial and disavowal. Whenever a politician, how many times does a politician say it's time for change? If I had £1 for every time that was used in a stump speech, and yet you have to have the IQ of a cabbage not to realize that there will be no change. There never has been any real change, and politicians will never change because they do themselves out of a job. And yet we go along with it. So this notion of disavowal, I think it's your point that Dostoevsky describes that brilliantly, because the way I describe it, you were talking about the opposition of the brain, and so does Ian McGilchrist. I think in literature and art, and I'll get back to your point about the Dionysian, because I think it's spot on, but I think it refers to tension. I think great literature embodies the tension that is innate in the human condition, and that tension at a biological level are the two hemispheres. And the fact that you cannot escape both of them, we're designed to have both, but at certain moments we choose to privilege one over the other. So in a great work of art or literature, there isn't just one Euclidean answer. There's a tension. Things are partly true and untrue at the same time. So we're discussing Fyodor's character. I defy anyone who says they can define Fyodor's character is a liar, because they're giving you an encapsulated summary. They're not explaining the tension. And this goes to the Dionysian and the Apollonian. The point is that that's what Greek theatre did. This is Nietzsche's point. The birth of tragedy is this Dionysian cathartic expression. But then you also have the music that's more Euclidean, because it's more music has a mathematical component. And you have the two of them held in perfect tension. And that was what made Greek tragic theatre such a stunning cultural achievement. Whereas in modern terms, we have things like TV programs with the whole Zizek laughter soundtracks, or more significantly, you recognize the underlying format of the program you're watching. There's no tension. You know what's going to happen. Oh, right, now there's time for a car chase. Now someone will get murdered. Oh, now we'll have a woman in a bikini. All these culture industry tropes. And that is the opposite of creative tension of art. And that's what, I'm always going on about why art and literature and all these things are important, because what Dostoevsky's doing, he's safeguarding this tension. He's putting it in an aesthetic form. And my personal belief is, it's got no psychological knowledge behind it, but my gut feeling is that it's why young people are increasingly mentally vulnerable and delicate all the time, is that they can't deal with this tension. I think literature trains you to deal with the tension. And I think a lot of young people in this never-ending sea of screens, getting these reflections of narcissistic influences and the banality ultimately of what's being sold to them. It's tensionless. It's the Euclidean side in terms of underlying formulas. It's not... I'm sorry to keep repeating myself, but this theory of tension just intrigues me.
I'm going to be a little bit vulgar. There's a meme, I've seen it a couple of times, and it's a meme that's been shared on Instagram, and it says, you awaken inside of your pod, and the pod jerks you off. You go to work and you sit at your office desk and it jerks you off, and it goes through your life in the future. Everything you do gives you pleasure, instant dopamine hits, and it does it for you. So what you're talking about is the tension that's not done for you. So now I think we discussed pornography elsewhere, and I always have this point of view that, like, the one of the rough things with pornography is it's all done for you. You don't have to imagine anything because it's right there. If I've understood McGilchrist right, apart from the tension, I think he's also saying we're too much in the left brain. Is that right?
Yeah.
Which is largely content focused, not context focused. If I've colored in with crayons there, I'm sorry about that. That's how I translated what he was saying. It's more content than context. And I think without tension and without the muscle of delivering your own context and understanding context, you do develop a kind of contextual illiteracy where, some of the arguments you've had online and I've had online with people, they seem to be very low IQ, but maybe all that's happening is they're losing their grasp of perceiving context. Did I overreach there, maybe?
No, not at all. It just reminded me, I'm not using this as an example of someone saying something stupid, but a guy, just a very brief comment on my channel, was being very supportive, but he said, I think his introductory comment was, you seem to be very suspicious of reason. And I think he's wrong in the sense, because it's not his fault. You can't give full context in every video you ever done, but you've witnessed me say on many occasions, I don't want to get in a plane that isn't scientifically based.
Right.
if I have a medical condition, I don't go to a witch doctor. So from my
Yeah.
perspective, I believe 100% in reason, but where
Mm.
reason should occur. But I think I am deeply suspicious of a society that thinks reason, its place is everywhere. I think
Yes.
reason has a place, and I think what's brilliant about Brothers Karamazov is that he actually, Dostoevsky shows how the way in which human beings interact is not reducible to a formula. So what I was complaining about earlier on, I actually think is ultimately the strength of the novel. This semi-hysterical tone that goes throughout the novel is actually the inability of people to fully communicate with each other. But to put
Mm.
it in terms that people might be able to relate to more easily, did you manage to have a look at that pluribus I mentioned
No, I
with the
haven't watched it
TV?
yet. No.
Right, well, for people out there, there's a new series called Pluribus, and it's made by the same people who made Breaking Bad, Vince Gilligan. And
Oh.
it's got a nominally science fiction theme. Basically, a virus comes down to Earth and it makes one hive mind. But there's 12 people on Earth, basically you and me, who say, fuck
Mm.
off, I want to be unhappy. Because
Mm.
everyone's heraldically joined in their minds and is happy and doesn't feel any sadness. So
Mm.
pluribus is e pluribus unum is the motto on dollar bills.
Mm-hmm.
From lots of people, from everyone, one. It's a unity from
Mm.
plurality is the idea, and that's the theme. They've
Mm-hmm.
only made so far. There's only been I think 3 or 4 episodes released. They're doing it once a week on pluribus, but this theme of the
Mm.
hive mind, I think, is incredibly apposite because you have to buy into this shared consciousness nowadays, and you're
Mm.
abnormal and unusual if you defy it. And
Mm.
I would argue to get back to Brothers Karamazov, the way in which people fail to communicate with each other is indicative of all human communication ultimately fails because we don't have this pluribus TV series hive mind. That's not
Mm.
even something I'd aspire to. I don't want to know what's going on in somebody else's head fully because that
Mm.
wouldn't be a human existence. The fact that we are
Mm.
entities to each other and we never fully know what the other person's thinking. And the point of the novel that we've already identified is often the characters in Dostoevsky themselves don't know what they are thinking fully
Mm.
themselves. Because your point about context, your views about yourself and your views about the same situation may change over your lifetime. You're
Mm.
not the same person. It's like Heraclitus said, you never step in the same river twice. We are never the
Mm.
same people to ourselves even. So how are we supposed to
Mm.
have a really good grasp on other people? And I think that's
Mm.
what the Brothers Karamazov, it's about this fathers and sons, but remember it's called Brothers Karamazov, and at the end of the novel there's this hokey, let's all be together as the Russian people, let's mourn the death of this young child. But it's about
Mm.
brotherhood. It's about brotherly love. But brotherly love, it's not the same as the hive mind. And I think it's really interesting that this pluribus has arisen at this point in time. I think Vince Gilligan spent a decade or two working on it. But he's obviously, I think, great artists, whether they're in film and TV or literature or art, whatever. It's Marshall McLuhan's point. They have an amazing ability to pick up on the zeitgeist. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we're living in a time where the hive mind is at its full zenith, and what Dostoevsky's writing at the beginning of it. So Notes from Underground, he's in the basement of a St. Petersburg horrible flat, and he's raging against, but St. Petersburg itself was an artificial city created by, the Tsar, trying to bring modernity to Russia. And it's fake, and the streets are like American artificially segmented quadrants. It's a fake city, and this was beginning to hit. I think Russia's weird because it never had our industrialization, so it got hit
Mm.
straight in the face with a lot of these issues that we had a century or two to try and deal with, badly as we did.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the things that not about Brothers Karamazov, but this thing of the hive mind. It's interesting to note how, in my lifetime, I've seen conformity become a very high value, where it wasn't when I was a kid. Rebellion was a high value. So cool kids nowadays conform. They conform to the whatever the dominant ideology, the dominant narrative is. The so-called rebellious kids are saying exactly what massive corporations in the military industrial complex are telling them to do. It's this weird shift to conformity. It's cool to conform. It's hip to be square, like the 80s song said. Conformity as pleasure.
But linked to that, as I was reading recently that Brothers Karamazov, it actually struck me. It was quite poignant. I don't know whether I'm being melodramatic, but I'm not sure how many more decades there are when a significant number of people can still read it and get something from it. I think we're hitting a period of time. I can't imagine this generation in 20 years' time reading Brothers Karamazov.
The only hope is major disaster or war. because unironically, because I think and this is in line with the themes of the book, and Nietzsche, I think you told me Nietzsche read Karamazov. We know that, right? Or is that
I think
conjecture?
so. No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, because I'm sorry, I'm trying to excuse myself because my mind's not working properly, but from memory, I think Nietzsche had read Dostoevsky, but Dostoevsky hadn't read Nietzsche. I think that's the way it works, and if I've got that wrong, I apologize.
I think that's right. And it's only 2 years after the final episode of Brothers Karamazov comes out that Nietzsche writes the famously misunderstood tirade, "God is dead, we have killed him. What festivals will we now have to create to wash God's blood from our hands," and so on. I think Beyond Good and Evil. And there is, I think they saw it coming. I think they could see it coming. The only way off this train track that we're on currently is disaster, because again, to talk about the limitations of reason, the only reasonable thing to do is to believe in progress and to keep investing in technological progress. But the only healthy thing to do is a Dionysian thing, which is to reject it and just say, no, that's it. Technological progress is only progress within the coordinates and the objectives of technology. So we are now feeding robots. We're now serving the robots, not the robots serving us. And the only thing, we don't have the will to stop that by just saying, okay, we'll stop it. It would require a disaster or a war or both.
Could I get you on to? I feared before we started this that all we talk about is the Grand Inquisitor, and I'm really chuffed that actually we haven't at all. But the Grand Inquisitor section. To get back to my accusation that I think Ivan is narcissistic. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense is when I've seen loads of videos or when I've read articles, most people think the Grand Inquisitor section is the best bit of the book. And B, they think Ivan's argument is very strong and powerful. When I struggle with this notion, I think is it called theodicy, the idea that the coexistence of God and evil. So it's the theology of how can evil exist alongside God. And that, yes, correct me if I'm wrong,
it's very easy to resolve. It's very easy to resolve, but go on, sorry.
Yeah, well, no, that seems to be the underpinning of Ivan. It's several key stages says it's not worth, and he says, I don't reject the notion of God. He's quite clear and explicit. He says, I reject the cost of having a God that will let small children suffer. So he says, it's not that I don't believe in God, but I'm returning my ticket, is a paraphrase of one of the direct quotes he gives. But this idea, I struggle, maybe because I'm an evil, unempathetic mutant, but I struggle to understand how the suffering of children has anything whatsoever to do with the existence or non-existence of God, for this reason. If God did exist, are people like Ivan expecting him to interfere every time a child suffers? Are they expecting a God to interfere every time a volcano is about to explode and people will die? a direct consequence of giving human beings free will, and this is another theme in the Grand Inquisitor story, free will almost automatically implies God's not putting his hands in the till anymore. God is taking a backward step. We've left the Garden of Eden. Get on with it. And everything that's valuable in life is because it's gained through pain and suffering. Now I'm really doing my demotivational speech. But that strikes me as self-evident. And then the idea that why I call Ivan a narcissist, I'm giving my ticket back. It's like, who the hell are you, Ivan? How do you get to criticize? I almost went Northern Irish then. Who are you? Who is he?
Who are you?
That's a shout out to Darren, by the way. But who is he?
Sorry, Darren.
Who is he to, by definition, how do you question God's rationale? You're doing it, and he actually says this himself in the essay. He says, it's not a logic that is human that would allow children to suffer. And yes, Ivan, you're completely correct. So why are you using human... You're discussing a supernatural being, and you're expecting human logic to apply. And when it doesn't apply, you have a hissy fit and say, I'm giving my ticket back. And even if all of that was true, Ivan, the big drama queen, has given his ticket back. You're left without a God. You're left with the same problem children are suffering. So how far have you taken us, Ivan? And what's your solution? What are you going to do about it? Or are you just going to keep whining like a big pussy?
I think it's a really interesting point that's made in the book, and it's a really interesting point generally. I've never really struggled too long with the theodicy issue, because I always just say, well, I mean, and this is a conversation, a debate that I've had with Muslims and Christian friends. If evil exists, it must exist at the will of God. Therefore, God includes evil. And that's the simplest resolution you come to it. Oh my God, God couldn't be evil. Well, it's only evil from our point of view. What's evil? It doesn't please me. Okay, so you want a God who's going to just give you endless dopamine hits and just give you endless pleasure. So when you're receiving endless pleasure, like the point I made before about the technological dead end, I wake up from my pod, it wanks me off. I go to work, the office desk wanks me up. It's just constant done for me pleasure. That is good. You know, that immorally, that's good because it feels good. Morally, this is bad because it feels bad. That's a weak morality. But I think we have to accept the limitation. Our human values are human because we're human beings. So we don't want our young ones to suffer. We don't want to suffer. We don't want our old ones to suffer. But that doesn't mean there's no God. That's you're right. I think on this one, I'll agree with you. I think it is narcissistic because Ivan has pulled God down to earth and then recreated God in his own image and said, okay, you're a boss of a factory, or you're the head of a plantation, or you're the big man in the house. We're all your serfs. You can choose to pay us or punish us. Why are you choosing to punish us? That's ridiculous. But also, and it is narcissistic.
From a psychological point of view, it's a Zizekian point that purity or religion generates its own transgression. I think it's mentioned in the Grand Inquisitor section, or the earlier chapter, Rebellion. Ivan makes the point that powerful people are attracted by the innocence of children and want to destroy it. Now, I'd suggest that is part of, if humans have free will, and human psychology is going to have an element of temptation, evil is surely going to occur. So the only possible solution to get rid of evil is to take away free will, and then you're not human anymore. And it's a theme that's addressed in the essay, but I don't think it's addressed properly. Free will. It's the Grand Inquisitor basically says the same thing. Human beings can't handle free will. You want the truth, you can't handle it. And that is the truth. So what I'm arguing is the Grand Inquisitor's patronizing idea that only a few people can handle free will may actually be true. But I'm on God's side. It's quite useful to have him on your side in the sense that I think free will is the ultimate definition of what it is to be a human being. And you can't just play around with that. It's either it's there or it isn't. It's a binary choice. You have free will and you're on your own until the afterlife, or you don't have free will and God or any other human agency can interfere because they think they have your best interests at heart. But then you become less than a fully independent human being. And you go around in circles. I want my independence, painful as it is.
I'm trying to look up where Ivan says that, because when you said it, I remembered reading it, but I've not thought about that passage for a long time. And I remember at the time, I think I just dissociated from it. I remember thinking, this sounds like a modern indictment of paedophile rings, of people in power abusing children. It felt very, very modern when I read it, and then I just
can I add to that quickly? What's interesting about that is, if you actually think about Ivan's argument, is that there cannot be a world in which God is justified if children suffer. With reference, forgive contemporary reference, but it does intrigue me. With reference to the British grooming gang scandal, there's a new form of atheistic religion in which multicultural values are deemed to be so important that in the name of that, inverted commas, God, children have to suffer. Because the powers that be have refused to, A, initially accept that it ever happened, B, have tried to cover it up, and C, once it's been found out, have tried to minimize it. All because there's this weird secular religion now that certain things can't be questioned, even at the price of children suffering, which is a weird spin on the whole Grand Inquisitor story and Ivan's obsession with children not suffering.
Can I read out that passage?
Yeah, go for it.
This is who's talking here? It's Ivan, isn't it? It's Ivan saying, I meant to speak of the suffering of mankind generally, but we'd better confine ourselves to the sufferings of the children. That reduces the scope of my argument to a tenth of what it would be. Still, we'd better keep to the children, though it does weaken my case. But in the first place, children can be loved even at close quarters, even when they are dirty, even when they are ugly. I fancy, though, children never are ugly. The second reason why I won't speak of grown-up people is that besides being disgusting and unworthy of love, they have a compensation. They've eaten the apple and know good and evil, and they have become like gods. They go on eating it still. But the children, they haven't eaten anything and are so far innocent. Are you fond of children, Alyosha? I know you are, and you will understand why I prefer to speak of them. If they too suffer horribly on earth, they must suffer for their father's sins. They must be punished for their fathers who've eaten the apple. But that reasoning is of the other world and is incomprehensible for the heart of men here on earth. The innocent must not suffer for another's sins, and especially such innocence. You may be surprised at me, Alyosha, but I'm awfully fond of children too. And observe, this is the bit I remember, cruel people, the violent, the rapacious, the Karamazovs are sometimes very fond of children. Children, while they are quite little, up to 7, for instance, are so remote from grown-up people, they are different creatures, as it were, of a different species. I knew a criminal in prison who had, in the course of his career as a burglar, murdered whole families, including several children. But then when he was in prison, he had a strange affection for them. A lot of psychopaths are sentimental about children and animals. He spent all of his time at his window watching the children playing in the prison yard. He trained one little boy to come up to his window and made great friends with him. You don't know why I'm telling you all this, Alyosha. My head aches and I'm sad. He's making the case that God cannot be good here. I just think it's another great passage. It's so good because you can see from his fevered point of view the case that he's making. Why should innocents suffer? But it's all from within the coordinates of God is the father of the household and he can issue rewards or punishments, and he's choosing to punish the innocent.
Yeah, and that's another issue all the way through the book there. The 3,000 rubles that could drive you insane trying to work out what's it all about. But the idea that, I think that's an important theme. People think that if they do, Dmitri thinks, or Mitya thinks he's entitled to more of his father's inheritance. And other people think if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm entitled to it's a very exchange-orientated view of human relationships, but it's riddled throughout the book. When actually, I think what's interesting is the religious point of view is it's the parable of the prodigal son. You don't always get what you think you deserve. Morality, and at least religious morality in Christianity, isn't based upon a quid pro quo. And I think that's what non-religious Western secular thought really, really struggles to understand. And in the Grand Inquisitor thing, what's also interests me is the Grand Inquisitor witters on, which is ironic, an accusation coming from someone like me. But he witters on. And in that, Jesus doesn't say a word to him. And we're assuming it's Jesus because it's pretty bloody obvious it's Jesus.
No,
but Jesus says
sure
nothing.
Jesus.
But that I also think is an interesting contrast. The idea that these people who want to create the human anthill, the people who want to create socialism on Earth, never stop yapping about their plans, what other people should do. Whereas all that Father Zosima ever says is you need to love your neighbor as your brother. And Jesus doesn't say a word. He just kisses him and is allowed out. And it's the lack of talk. It's the lack. What I'm suggesting is there's a disproportionate relationship in the Grand Inquisitor rabbiting, Jesus saying absolutely nothing. And yet Jesus is the one in the right. It's a non-equal exchange. It's not about equality of exchange. Whereas the novel, every character in the novel is working on a different basis. They're thinking, if I do X, Y, and Z, I will get my just dessert. And that's not how it... maybe Nietzsche is one of the exceptions because he's really into the Dionysian excess. He actually thinks, I'm going to go out, I'm going to live till I'm 30, but my God, I'm going to enjoy myself.
Yes. I think one of the other themes that comes up a lot in the book that's related to what you just said of, maybe people sort of trying to make deals with God and make contracts with reality. And if I do this, you should give me that, is just terrible resentment, and just the power of resentment and how much it eats people up from the inside. You referenced the socialists and the socialist effort. A lot of that, beyond, loving each other as equals and all the rest of it, it was about tremendous envy and tremendous resentment against people who seemed to have more material wealth than they did.
Well, also, I explained it badly at the beginning because I really was rambling, but the very beginning when I was talking about the relationship between the Russians and the peasants, what's ironic, sadly ironic, is one of the reasons the Leninists, the Bolsheviks, were so rabidly determined and violent, is that they had very little support from the actual people. They purported to speak on behalf of the people, but they had no real grounding in the peasantry. Like Mao, when his cadres went out into the countryside of China, and all these Chinese peasants are like, what the hell are you doing here? You're lily-livered, you've got no calluses on your hands, you can't do anything. But so there's this weird mismatch between the actual people and those purporting to speak on behalf of the people. That I find quite interesting, that this is what drove their mania for power, ironically. A lack of a mandate, not a mandate itself.
Yes. So Dostoevsky finished writing this 1882, and then the Bolshevik Revolution is 1917?
The revolution was 1917, but the preamble to that. So he's writing on the cusp of these radical movements rising in Russia, yeah. Right.
Yes, it's
Oh, well, I was going to say before I forget, in the Grand Inquisitor, there's an actual section, I don't know whether you can find it, but there's a section where the Grand Inquisitor actually talks about, there's a few sentences that are remarkably similar. When I was talking about tension and what good literature gives us, the Grand Inquisitor says, you threaten people with ambiguity, you threaten people with nuance, and the people can't handle it. And that's my point about the anthill versus literature. Literature doesn't give you the answers. There isn't one answer to the Brothers Karamazov.
I don't remember that line. That's beautiful, though. That's really beautiful. And that's his accusation to Jesus. He says, you're threatening people with ambiguity and they need certainty. I'm
Let's see
asking
if I can.
ChatGPT now.
I think I can work out. Hopefully.
The Inquisitor tells Christ people cannot handle the terror of choice. They crave authority, miracle, and clarity.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have it written down. I'd have to. Where are we? Oh, here we go. You forget that serenity and even death. So this is the Grand Inquisitor talking. You forget that serenity and even death are dearer to human beings than the freedom of choice that comes with the knowledge of good and evil. There's nothing more alluring to people than freedom of conscience, but there's also no greater source of suffering. And instead of a solid foundation for calming their conscience once and for all, your choice was to give them everything that's vague and enigmatic, theoretical and indeterminate, everything that's beyond the ability of human beings. I think that's a perfect description of good literature. Art gives you what is enigmatic. Art gives you what's beyond the prosaically human. Art makes you think more, not less. Any art that gives you definitive answers, I'd argue, isn't art.
Yes, I do. When I'm talking to Christians about this, we typically run up against this wall. There's the Jesus of emancipation and revolution and mystery and mysticism, and then there's the church founded by Paul, who was Saul, who was the former tormentor of early Christians, who was a Pharisee, who was sent by mandate by the chief of the Pharisees to persecute Christians, and that's who sets our Christian church. And I've always said to Christians, doesn't that bother you? You're quoting scripture that was selected by this church of Paul, not the original teachings of Christ, many of which just got binned out of the Bible altogether. We call them Gnostic Gospels or apocryphal texts. Yeah. And
I always think of St. Paul.
They don't like that.
Well, forgive the blasphemy, but I always thought, ironically, I'm called Paul, but I've always thought of St. Paul as the Peter Mandelson of Christianity. Where, for those non-British viewers, Peter Mandelson was the brains, if you want to use that phrase loosely, behind Blairism. And he was the orchestrator. He was the seller of what was called New Labour, which sounds like a soap powder. But if you want to repackage something, if you want to sell it in a particular way, Peter Mandelson was your man. And I think that's what Paul did with the Christianity. He was basically a marketing guy.
Yes, absolutely. And giving people what they wanted rather than what they needed. Also, he was sent to defeat the Christian rebellion, and he did. I had this argument with a guy I've known for years, somebody who the three of us may do an interview at some point. And just recently had this argument with him. And I was like, well, Paul was sent to defeat the Christian revolution, and he did. He didn't kill them all. He used bureaucracy. He absorbed them rather than destroying them. And he basically put a leash on the early Christians and went, here you go, here's a nice church for you. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? Now, don't you feel better? Now we see where you are. Now we can see what you're doing. Now you will go back to paying your taxes and procreating and doing as you're told.
Well, I'm beginning to look at this. So with my friend Josh, I'm looking at St. Mark's Gospel as the first one, but the way in which there's this brilliant English literature critic who's dead now, Frank Kermode, and he wrote a brilliant book called, I'll be referring to it all the time, it's called The Genesis of Secrecy. And he basically takes Mark's Gospel. It takes him a while to warm up. It's a short book. He doesn't address it immediately, but he just addresses the general concept of parables and what's behind a parable. And the interesting aspect of parables are they're not meant to be understood at first glance. So I think I'm arguing, I'd suggest that parables are in another form of art. This is what Kermode, I think, is arguing, because like me, he's an agnostic. But insofar as he has a revelatory religious type of sentiment, he says he finds it in great art. And if you look at St. Mark's Gospel, it has an incredibly complex literary structure. So he approaches St. Mark's Gospel as a work of literature, which obviously for some Christians, it's not verboten, but it's not how they would do it. So I'm always been fascinated by this relationship between revelation and faith, but also just the beautiful enigmatic complexity of a good piece of literature. And I think I'm strongly of the opinion that Christianity, at least when I was growing up, would be a lot more powerful if it was taught in a more intellectual way. Because I think the Bible as literature is endlessly fascinating, but it's taught in a very dull, non-literary way. I'm guessing because religious teachers are fearful that by teaching it as literature, you're downgrading its religious quality. I'd argue it actually has the opposite effect. I think more young people would be intrigued by the Bible if they were more appreciative of its full complexity.
Yes, very cynically, I think they face the same problem as the pharmaceutical industry. If you make everyone healthy, you're killing your own business, something like that. They can't give people genuine tools of emancipation and thought because they would lose their positions of authority.
I'd argue they wouldn't be giving them tools of emancipation. As anyone who's watched my channel knows, all I do is confuse you further. I'd be insulted if anyone accused me of giving them the answer to anything, because that's not what it's about. It's about realizing if I talk about a book or a painting, I actually want people to think, oh crap, it's more complicated than I thought. He's not explaining it. He's making me more confused and more. He's pointing out, he's highlighting the enigmatic qualities rather than the definitive qualities. And why I think you can do that is great works of art. It's a very simple test. If you gave me a really crappy novel, modern contemporary novel, even someone who can witter like I can, there's a limit to how much you could talk about it. But I'm convinced you and I, God forbid, but you and I could probably do 10 videos on Brothers Karamazov without breaking a sweat. That's not because we've got verbal diarrhea. It's possibly true. It's just because it's an inherently enigmatic piece of work. Yeah.
And it's rich. I would push back against you saying that what you're delivering is not emancipatory. I would say it is in its essence, because if in psychology is the concept of the locus of control. So if it's internal, I largely believe that I'm responsible for what happens in my life. If it's largely external, then I largely believe that I'm just a victim of circumstances. And with ambiguity, with right brain type thinking, with an acceptance that there is no conclusion, which is very aggravating for people, but it's a very blue belt philosophy problem. There's no black belt philosophers who struggle with ambiguity, I hope, that would struggle with ambiguity. You just have to shrug your shoulders and go, well, that's just the fucking way it is. It's ambiguous. That in itself means that the person receiving that isn't looking for an authoritative, it is this, it is that. They're not looking for an authority to give them a binary answer. Whereas we, generally speaking, in modern culture, certainly in the West, everywhere's the West now, so the world, constantly looking for certainty. People loathe ambiguity. They hate it. They absolutely hate it because they've been fed a consistent diet of certainty slop from the day they were born, and their parents are consuming it and all their friends are consuming it. So there is a loathing and a resentment towards nuance and ambiguity and mystery.
But it's also, would you accept it's addictive? Being given answers is like ultra processed food. You know it's bad for you, but you crave more of it. Maybe, I'm sorry to stretch the dietary analogy, and it's ironic given the crap I eat, but you eat ultra processed food, you get glucose spikes, which leads to the desire for more cravings, more food. So the very thing that's bad for you is the very thing that's asking you to ask for more of it. And you're in this eternal loop. And I'd suggest that's what ready-made answers give you. It's the mental equivalent of a glucose spike.
Yes.
Whereas I would go to my grave saying more people should read Brothers Karamazov. But as you said right at the beginning, I wouldn't say, especially because I was in a fevered state when I read it, but to say, did you enjoy it, Paul? Well, no. But this is my comeback to you all the time, isn't it? That's a daft question. What's enjoyment got to do with it? But it's a lie.
Happiness is a useless category. Useless category.
But it's a lie in the sense I can only imagine what it's like to come back from a really hard set at the gym. But I'm guessing you didn't enjoy it at the time, but it's the endorphins afterwards that make it worthwhile. And I would argue
Yes.
that's what you may not enjoy reading Brothers Karamazov at the time, but it percolates, it germinates, to mix metaphors, and you're not the same person before or after reading it.
No.
And again, that's not a bad legacy for an artist to say they've achieved.
I was walking behind two people today. I don't know what event they were a part of in Limassol in Cyprus. And they both had on these bright red T-shirts. And on the back, it said, of both their T-shirts, a book is a magical gateway to another world. And I wanted to catch up with them and be like, what's the event? Why are you wearing these weird T-shirts? But my calves hurt from training yesterday and I couldn't catch them. But there's this weird synchronicity. Like 4 hours before I'm due to sit down with you and chat about the Brothers Karamazov, as we just said we could easily do 10 hours on it. And it just said it. Like, it's a very Jungian synchronicity moment. Books are a magical gateway to another world. Yes, I think this book is, the reason why people love it is because from one point of view, you read it and it's like swallowing a psychedelic. It really makes you think about life very, very differently. And so he's done you've got to give him kudos for that. He's done a great job. Yes, it's painful, but some acid trips are painful. Some psilocybin trips are frightening and awkward and uncomfortable. Ayahuasca can be. But afterwards you think, yeah, that was good. I got something from that. Maybe not fun, but something.
Yeah, I think like I said, I'm going to do some more videos on my channel on this, but one that, I don't know whether you've ever heard of a guy called Mikhail Bakhtin, was a Russian critic. And he had this concept with specific reference. I think one of his books was called, The Problem with Dostoevsky's Poetics? Forgive me if I've misremembered, but it's two basic ideas that are very similar. He said Dostoevsky was polyphonic and dialogic, meaning it's dialogue-based excessively, and there are multiple voices. And it's interesting that I think if you actually examine it, the supposed narrator of the whole book is a peer of Alyosha. He's another seminarian. I think I'm right in saying that. But it's very ambiguous who's the overall narrator. And one of the reasons for that is there are so many characters. And beyond the number of characters, because there are key characters who have a large part of the novel to speak in. But then there are so many minor that they just flit in. So Kolya, the young boy who's introduced, and remember, this was supposed to be the first of at least 2 novels. So Dostoevsky meant this to be a continuing further novel. So do you remember there's a small boy Kolya who's a bit of a leader amongst the little boys at the end, and he's introduced and you think this is going somewhere, and it doesn't really, and he's a very odd character. And then there are I call them vignettes. There are vignettes all the way through the book. So when Alyosha gets his finger bitten by Ilyosha, I think he's called, which is quite a confusing thing to say, but he gets his finger bitten. And then there's another finger incident where, is it Lisa, the girl who's in a wheelchair, who's a hypochondriac, it seems. She has a hysterical outburst to Alyosha, one of her many hysterical outbursts. He leaves. She watches him through the crack in the door, go down the stairs and out the house. And then she slams her finger in the door. Yes. And then goes back and looks at her finger going black. And says, I think the final sentence in the chapter is, I am vile, I am vile, I am vile. And I think, that is mad. But that's just, there's vignette after vignette. And the cumulative effect, this is something what Bakhtin means about the polyphonic. There's no one, you could argue the Grand Inquisitor story is the fulcrum around which the whole novel rotates. But in terms of who is the chief character, I think you could have many arguments for many different characters. So I actually think, even though he has a very small role in terms of what he says, I think Smerdakov is a key character. Because he's the brother who's excluded. I mentioned earlier on, they all call him the lackey.
Mm.
They're all very mean to him, even that doesn't necessarily preclude the fact he's also a nasty little psychopath. But there is this question of he's not being given a fair rub of the green in life, and I'm not excusing him, because he's a fictional character anyway, why would I? But he's an odd character, but there's also, he's not been, I think this is one of the underlying messages of the novel. If the novel is called The Brothers Karamazov and he was excluded, and the message of the novel is we need more brotherly love, and that's the conclusion when all the little boys say, oh yes, we'll all rise together as one, little Russian gang. Smerdakov doesn't get that in his life, and he reacts terribly against it. But I think it's Dostoevsky's warning of what happens to excluded people.
That would seem to be, yeah, I would read that the same way. The warning of the brother who's excluded is the one who commits the worst actual crime. Other people talk about it and they shout and jump up and down, but he actually fucking commits murder and theft, probably of his own father. Why? Because of the nihilism, just raw resentment and nihilism that he was plunged into through being excluded by everybody. So yeah, maybe it was a warning from that point of view. Don't exclude. But the people you exclude might come back and kill you.
Well, there is that. That is, insofar as it works as a novel, it's because Dostoevsky's talking about. I think there's a lot of structure in the novel, even though this might go against some of the things I've said. It comes across as very hysterical, but the number of characters who have a mirror image, or they come in pairs. So, for example, Father Zosima, one of my favourite characters in the book, is Father Ferapont, the mad nutter of a hardcore hermit who basically says, you're not hermits, I live in a chainmail coat in the middle of an unheated hut, and I'm on my knees 16 hours a day. It's like a Monty Python sketch. Hermits. But so you could go all the way through the novel, and there are characters that stand in opposition to each other. So there's a parallelism all the way through, and there's this circularity. Smerdakov was conceived in sin in the worst way because his mother was mentally disabled, and the father was so debauched. It's written, isn't it written, that he basically wanted to prove to himself that he could find something in any woman whatsoever, no matter how horrible.
Yeah. So
that's the product of Smerdakov, and that's the thing that comes back and eventually kills Fyodor. So in that sense, there is some natural justice on earth for Fyodor, despite the fact Ivan's argument is there is no natural justice, innocent people suffer. At least in that, and it's again, there's a parallel. Fyodor gets punished for his terrible things that he's done. Dmitri gets punished. And you could actually argue Dmitri deserves some type of punishment, but he doesn't get punished for the crimes he's actually committed. He gets punished for something different.
He's punished for a crime he said he would commit.
Yeah. There's like Minority Report. And in some ways, in his heart, he is guilty, because if, for example, he belts Grigor over the head with a brass pestle, he could have done that and killed him. So the intent, he has to check that he hasn't killed him. And when he goes away, he doesn't know for sure that he hasn't killed him. So he's left a seriously injured person. His wife happens to find him, but she's in a deep sleep, so she may never have found him. He could have bled to death. So Dmitri, I think we tend to forget that the crimes Dmitri actually has committed. So is he any less guilty just because Grigor happened not to die? The intent, the violence, everything was there. So he's got sentenced for the wrong crime, but arguably the right sentence for the wrong crime.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I actually didn't see the parallel characters the first time around of reading it, but that's an interesting point of view. So that it might be a sort of an oblique reference to what we were talking about earlier, where things happen in tension. So these two characters, this one is like this and this one is like this. Where's the truth of it? It's going to be somewhere in between the two.
Yeah, so we don't have the time to go through it all, but for example, Grushenka and Katerina are mirror, and Ivan and Dmitri are both interested. There's almost like if you try to draw a diagram of all the relationships and how they feed off each other's resentment. You talked about resentment earlier on. A lot of, and it's a René Girard idea about mimetic desire. It seems that Dmitri and Ivan are being attracted to women just because the other brother has an interest in that woman initially. And there's a real, and that,
Yes.
not to mention the father, there's a triangular mimetic process going on. It's incredibly convoluted and complicated, but I think the general simple point is people feed off each other, their heightened emotions, and that goes all the way through the novel. But I think Dostoevsky structures it in quite a deliberate way, yet when you read it, it seems incredibly chaotic.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think so. It's we didn't even really get onto the religious. There's more religious stuff in the book, isn't there, that we've not touched on. But like you said, there's so much you could talk about with this book. There's so much there.
Yeah, I just what I can never get around though is the whole theodicy problem, because I think I've mentioned before. Alex O'Connor is this professional atheist or agnostic on YouTube who has a massive following.
He was. I think he might be converting to Christianity just recently.
Oh, right.
But go on.
Well, that'll
Maybe.
be good for more clicks, won't it? But I'll need to look that up. Thank you for the pointer, because I'll check that out. But someone else will replace him. You know, there's always a Christopher Hitchens who argues against, and it's just the issue about evil makes no sense to me on a purely logical basis. If people who are religious are accused of being illogical, then the people criticizing them, when you can find illogicality in their argument, it just strikes me as quite ironic. So the whole God can't exist because evil does is illogical if you start with the premise that God is a super transcendent being that doesn't follow human logic. So we're back to this narcissism of Ivan.
No, Dr. Paul. He's a man. He's a nice Caucasian man from Greece or the Levant or something, and he's watching us. And he's watching us at all times. He's a man. No, I agree with you, and I think that's my beef with modern Christianity, is that it makes it petty, it makes it stupid, and by being rigidly literal, by insisting that the ancient Jews were a bit dumb, and the Book of Job was a story of something they believed happened, or that the story of Adam and Eve is something that they literally believed happened. And I'm like, why can't you give people credit? They didn't have iPhones, but they weren't fucking idiots. They understood myth, they understood poetry, they understood concepts, and they probably would have been far more right brain activated than we are today. So the idea that they took it as literally as we do today, it's like we've regressed with our modernity and our technological progress. We've gone back in terms of wisdom.
Can I just one last thing I want to get off my chest, and then I'll let you go. But the Ivan as the almost like the Abraham of woke, because ultimately,
Go on.
Well, my critique of Ivan's story of the Grand Inquisitor is ultimately, we're back to my point about I want to give him a ticket back. I don't like this, and I don't like this is preference. I'd prefer there was a world in which children didn't suffer, even if that was at the cost of people having free will and not living like zombies. I prefer. It's ultimately a lot of woke ideologies based upon unsubstantiated preferences that aren't grounded in anything external other than one's own feeling of moral righteousness. And I think that's where some of the origins of woke are being described by Dostoevsky.
There is a criticism of sort of modern woke mindset. In the scene where Fyodor is making a scene in front of Father Zosima. Can I read it out?
Yeah, sure.
Fyodor Pavlovich skipped up and imprinted a rapid kiss on the eldest in hand. It is. Oh wait, sorry. I must go back. Above all, this is the elder speaking to Fyodor. He says, "Don't lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to such a pass that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and for others. And having no respect, he ceases to love. And in order to occupy and distract himself without love, he gives way to passions and coarse pleasures and sinks to bestiality in his vices, all from continual lying to other men, and to himself. The man who lies to himself can be more easily offended than anyone. The man who lies to himself can be more easily offended than anyone." You know, it is sometimes very pleasant to take offense, isn't it? A man may know that nobody has insulted him, but that he has invented the insult for himself, has lied and exaggerated to make it picturesque, has caught at a word and made a mountain out of a molehill. He knows that himself, yet he will be the first to take offense and will revel in his resentment till he feels great pleasure in it, and so pass to genuine vindictiveness. "But get up, sit down, I beg you. All this too is deceitful posturing. Blessed man, give me your hand to kiss." He goes on. This is Fyodor. It is pleasant to take offense. You said that so well, as I never heard it before. Yes, I've been all my life taking offense to please myself, taking offense on aesthetic grounds, for it is not so much pleasant as distinguished sometimes to be insulted. That you had forgotten, great elder, it is distinguished. I shall make a note of that. So there's this criticism of the type of person who delights in pretending to be offended by things they're really not offended by. Because if you take offense, you automatically create a context in which you have the moral high ground. If you've taken offense, you must be good, you must be virtuous, you must be right, and the other person must be wrong. It's like a really nasty little power game that people can play.
Can I give you one? I'm doing it deliberately at the end because if I'd done it at the beginning, A, you'd lose all the viewers, and B, it would take forever to discuss. So I'll just leave it as a little conversational hand grenade. But in Scotland at the moment, they've introduced a bill, or they're discussing a bill in which they've decided, and I don't want to go into the whole abortion debate, but they want to have in their legislation provision that doesn't disallow selective abortion. In other words, if someone wants to have an abortion just because they don't like the gender of the child, the sex of the child, they should be allowed to go ahead. The reason for that is, get this, they don't want to profile certain social groups. So it's better that they're allowed to do it than they're profiled and identified as people who want to do it. Does that make any sense to you?
Only because I've been living within this perverse degeneracy for decades. Yeah.
So that's one. So that's
their evil, insane logic.
Yeah. So that's the lack of logic. But get this, I was thinking about this the other day. This is all happening at the same time. In Scotland, they are one of the most pro-rabidly, pro-trans countries in terms of legislation or their willingness to ignore legislation. If any fetus that actually would come to full term isn't of a definite sex, because at the age of 3 they could decide they're the opposite sex, how many trans potential kids are being killed in the womb?
You be careful, because you'll ruin everything for them. If they hear that, they'll be very upset.
But am I being illogical?
No, listen, there's no sex.
There's no sex until there is.
The sex is just a social construct. You can choose to be whatever sex you want to be, unless you're in the womb and your parents who really want a daughter find out that you're a boy. Then you are a boy, and then you will be terminated.
Yeah, I think you summarised the lack of logic perfectly. But it's exactly, I mentioned it because you're talking about Fyodor talking about it's motivated by resentment, a lot of this thinking. It's motivated not by logic whatsoever. It's motivated by scarcely self-acknowledged motivations and reasons and dark resentments. And you'd have a field day, actually, I think, if you actually try and explore the woke virus. There's a lot more going on under the surface. It's like a swan's legs. It's got so little to do with logic. And in the context of all our discussion about Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky's talking about incredibly unfashionable issues about religion and morality in quite an archaic, frenetic, febrile manner. But actually, he's talking about things that are deeply psychologically relevant, as you've pointed out all the way through this discussion. There are these little vignettes that are profoundly psychologically insightful. But we're in a modern era where ideologically driven people are doing everything they possibly can to cover up their lack of logic, their lack of psychological self-awareness. You don't have to agree with Dostoevsky, but my God, he makes you think. Whereas these people are professional coverers up of all the issues Dostoevsky's bringing to the surface. And that's, it would be my last point would be to say that is the overarching, for me, justification of art and literature. It refuses to cover up what's inconvenient to be covered up.
True say. Should we leave them sort of vaguely adrift, with no certainty, no conclusion, just as Dostoevsky would have wanted?
Yeah, ideally we should finish mid-sentence, but
yeah,
I was going to flag up in a month's time. We're going to be looking at Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, which I would highlight to people. I absolutely love it. Have you managed to glance at it yet, Richard? No.
Nothing yet, no.
I'd genuinely be fascinated. It doesn't really matter, because if you hate it, it'll make for a good discussion. I suspect, because it's got some good violence in it. No car chases, but it's got violence, which I think you'll quite enjoy.
Well, I'm trying to get through Philip K. Dick's Valis at the moment, which is his love letter to Gnosticism and Gnostic Christianity, and it is so laborious. I think I'm going to give up on it, so I might just download. Sorry for downloading, Paul. The Invisible Man instead.
Yeah, remember, for people, it's not The Invisible Man, it's Invisible Man. Which I'm convinced...
Now, this is a story... It's about the persecution of black men in America, right?
Yeah, but The Invisible Man is H.G. Wells. And I honestly think that's one of the reasons that it's not as popular as it should be, because people confuse it, or it subliminally puts them off.
I think two middle-aged white guys definitely should be talking about this. Hashtag white-splaining. We should put that in the title. We white-splain Invisible Man for you.
But this is... Can I just say that we did have a brief... in an email exchange, we briefly explored this. And the more I thought about it, the more I think I was succumbing to the woke mind virus. My whole reason for discussing it is, it happens to be about a black guy and black culture. But I'm actually arguing it's one of the best novels of the 20th century. So if only black people can discuss it, you're basically ghettoizing a great work of literature.
Yes, and further to that, I did ask somebody who is into his books whether he would do it, and he said, "Well, I'm British and Jamaican, and then I was like, this is just getting silly. So do I then have to find a guy who was alive in those times to talk about, like, I mean, it just gets silly. So no, I think if it's a good piece of literature, we can talk about it as humans. Well, yeah, regardless of how pale we are.
Yeah, and it's just interesting because Ralph Ellison himself was accused. He suffered abuse because, for various complex reasons, there was a bit of an Uncle Tom accusation made about him in his career, because he wanted to be a serious general writer. He didn't want to be pigeonholed as just a black writer. So all of the issues we're dealing with, he had to deal with in a much more, barbed way in his own life. And it must really piss you off. You've written, because I think he only wrote the one novel. Another novel, unfinished novel, was published posthumously. And he did produce quite a lot of non-fiction articles. And I think he did do some short stories. But I actually think he was stymied by the fact there was so much pressure on him to be a black author, which is a real shame given how good he was.
No, it's awful, and it's such a lazy thing, a lazy brick to sling at somebody if they're doing well or they're breaking the mold. He's a fucking Uncle Tom. Fuck him. He's not loyal. He's not loyal to the cause. Come on. Think of something else. So
we're doing that, and then can you remember the order? After that, we're doing H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds.
Oh, I thought we were doing Moby Dick.
We are, but it's been delayed because we wanted to be friendly to Darren.
Okay. War of the Worlds, and then
So we're doing Invisible
Fahrenheit.
Man, then we're doing War of the Worlds. Then do you want to pitch your Fahrenheit 451?
We're going to discuss Fahrenheit 451. So we'd like you to read Invisible Man, which I haven't read. I just finished Fahrenheit 451, which is kind of it's a sci-fi novel set in a soft, totalitarianistic, militaristic 1950s America, in which it is a crime to own books, and it's the author's love letter to literature and books and the importance of reading. And I just thought it was perfect. It's in line with Paul's channel and what his whole project is about. So I thought we should cover it. It's not a lot. It's a novella. It's quick to consume as well. So I recommend people read that, and everybody must read Invisible Man.
Yeah, our mutual friend Darren McGee is obsessed with War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, so we thought we'd be inclusive. So it's going to be, what was the next one? Invisible Man, War of the Worlds, Fahrenheit 451. Then
Moby
we were
Dick.
going to do, yeah, we're going to do Moby Dick as well, which I'm really looking forward to. I think it's it's a very famous novel, but I don't think it gets the kudos it deserves. So there's quite a lot on the horizon. I'll put them all in the live stream schedule so people will be able to see in advance. And also in the new year, Richard, this will make you laugh, I'm going to do a 200-page a time reading group on Proust's In Search of Lost Time. So that'll be the longest running live stream. Or
You're going to go through 200 pages on a live stream.
well, I don't know how I'm going to do it, whether I'm going to do independent videos or try it on live stream. I might just talk about, not read it, just analyze it. 200 pages at a time, the whole of the damn novel.
I think with those long form ones, you should have someone strip the audio out and put that out as a podcast as well. I think a lot of people would listen to that.
Well, maybe I'll have to talk to you about that. But yeah, but that would be. I have this image of me in my underpants, like Homer Simpson, eating a donut, getting to the very final page of In Search of Lost Time, and there'll be one other person who's accidentally joined the live stream, and that's how it will end. That's how I dream it will end.
I think it's going to be testing YouTube to its limits. I like it. I like that you're using YouTube in this way. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and see everybody in the next live stream in a month's time. In 2 weeks, I'm doing one with Joshua on St. Mark's Gospel, and check out Richard's Philosophy channel, and good night. Goodbye.
And goodbye.